the Jim and Terry Show. Or is it? The music suggests that it is. But the music is a song.
Do you see your world in a grain of sand? Do you see heaven in a pretty flower? Do you feel the gravity pull you down? Do you sense the space all around? Ceteris Paribus, all things are equal now. Ceteris Paribus, do I have to tell you how?
What has Latin got to do with anything? The title of the song is Ceteris Paribus, Latin for all things being equal, which is an economic way of approaching life and doing a little analysis where you isolate as many variables as possible in order to discern the impact of one variable in particular, one factor that is causing something else. Are you able to see through the smoke and mirrors in order to get to the truth, is perhaps another way of looking at it. So Ceteris Paribus is a Wigmore Allen Gibbons song. It was, for the longest time, the opening bits, the opening few bars were the introduction, and still are, of the Jim and Terry Show. My good friend Jim is not here in the Hobbit hole. The seat in the corner remains empty. A late night email signaling that he has other needs more pressing, and of course we wish him well. And whatever is occupying Jim, he will tell us about it when he next visits the Hobbit Hole studio for the Jim and Terry Show. In the meantime, there is more Latin afoot, more Latin in the studio. Ceteris Paribus is just one of them, but I'm going to start there because that phrase is one that has given me some pause. And what I would like to say is this Canadian Senate's sober second thought. If you didn't know that about the Canadian Senate, that's the whole reason for its existence, is that in the days of the development of democracy, at least the Canadian parliamentary, which is a British derivative style of democracy, we elected people. And you did have to have property, you did have to have a certain amount of status. Couldn't just be anybody. So to be a member of the House of Commons, you had to be a commoner. You had to be usually tied to the land in some way. And property ownership was one of the criteria for you to be a member. Is that kind of like setting the field a little bit skewed? Poor people didn't usually rise to the occasion of being elected, of being selected, of being predisposed to be able to be qualified to serve. But isn't service something we should all feel that we could do? I've often said I would vote for my good friend Jim, and that starts me off on what the House of Commons really should be about. People who want to serve, not people who are there to have a lifetime appointment. Apparently, if you serve more than one term, you go through an election to serve, and then you are re-elected once, you're in a lifetime pension club. I'm not sure about that. There are a lot of things about government that I'm not sure of, and perhaps there is a need to look at how we select our members of parliament. I've always advocated for election reform, that our election should not be first past the post. And that is the election style where a winner is declared just because they had the most. Even though in the case of Ontario, Doug Ford was elected with less than 40% of eligible voters actually casting a ballot. And of the 40%, less than 40% actually voted in favor of the leader, Doug Ford, and the Conservative Party, which makes it about 16% of eligible voters who actually voted for the Conservative government, even though they hold a majority of the seats in the House of Commons. Now, it's a little bit different in the federal situation because we have an agreement where the NDP agrees to support the Liberals as long as there's a little, should I use this word? Quid pro quo, as in, what's in it for me? As long as the NDP are able to push some of their key talking points to their electorate, to their membership. You have to give people something. Otherwise, why would they support you? So it's not coalition government, despite what the Conservative Party of Canada would say, despite what Pierre Poilievre and his, I don't want to use derisive terms, I want to say, can't we all get along and have civil discourse? If you have a chance to follow Joyce Vance, who was a federal prosecutor in the Midwest United States in the federal court system, she has a good program that I have enjoyed, and it is entitled Civil Discourse, which is lamenting the passing of when we could discuss things. We might have policy differences, and that's okay. You want to spend more on this, but I would rather spend more on that. Okay, well, let's agree to do a little of this and a little of that. Can't we just agree to do something? Something is better than nothing. Status quo is never an option. But the very definition of conservatism is status quo at best and retrograde at worst. Retrograde meaning you're taking it back somewhere. In the case of the United States, it's more obvious with their slogan, Make America Great Again, implying that it was great at some point, it is no longer great, that it's broken. Sound familiar? Pierre Poilievre, it's broken. Canada's broken. Well, I don't believe in brokenness at all in the political system at this point. And the main reason for brokenness has been economic disparity or economic despair, where we are saying Canada's so broken economically. Well, we need to consider what's been going on, as in a global pandemic, which most of the people on the conservative side of this political spectrum would say did not really exist, was a fake thing. The vaccines killed more people and wearing masks killed more people. Well, if you're of that ilk, then it's going to take a lot of persuading. But if you've got data, I'm all prepared to look at the evidence. So far, I see evidence of one thing and lack of evidence on the other. Evidence is for a global pandemic, the likes of which we haven't seen since the days of the early 20th century and the Spanish flu. And now we had a rapidly developed vaccine. Some people will say, yeah, but that's the problem. It was developed too fast. There weren't security checks. There weren't vetting. They should have done this, should have done that. For the life of me, I'm not sure how we can decide what is best when we trust science. And for some, that phrase, trust the scientists, is an anathema. It's a boogeyman. We don't want to trust science. What has science done that's good? Well, you have to look at your lifestyle around you. And if you're living in a home, and if you got some kind of truck in your driveway, and if you are putting money in your gas tank, and if you are buying food, and if you are aspiring to put your kids into sports teams and stuff, all of that stuff is provided at some point by the scientific methodology. It's not by magic, it's not by wishful thinking, it's by policy decisions about wealth and how wealth should be raised, as in taxation, and how it should be shared, as in policy decisions. The classic examples of this and that is the Pierre Trudeau, the original 1970s effort to have a national energy program. NEP, you can look it up under Pierre Trudeau, who was concerned about supplying Canadians with Canadian-sourced oil products. And that is the beginnings of Petro-Canada. But the conservative way of approaching this is The government can do nothing good, nothing efficient. It is a big boogeyman of tax dollars going after nothing. And so Brian Mulroney came along and sold it all off. And that is the way of liberal policy versus conservative policy. Who benefits from each one? You should be able to measure it. Ceteris Paribus, all things being equal, isolate the one variable and say, your policies make a difference. And you should be able to see taxes go in one direction or another. You should be able to measure that, and that's called the federal budget. If you don't like the budget, you can vote the government out by disapproving and voting no to the budget, which has to be tabled. And I believe Chrystia Freeland has already done that. So in Canada, we're in a position now where the Conservatives can say, no, don't like it. Not a thing in there that we want to support. Of course, there's the axe the tax, spike the hike sloganeering that goes on. And policy is not slogans. Policy is thoughtful, cogent, rational decisions with measurable outcomes. And you measure not just the impact of the policy at the point you approve it. By the way, it takes, 3 readings through the House of Commons? Another few readings, 2, I believe, in the Senate to be ratified, and then back to the House of Commons for the 3rd reading. So it's tabled, introduced, it has to go to committee to be studied. Then its revisions are brought back to the floor. It's voted on. If it's approved, it goes to the Senate. It gets reading through there, goes to committee there, gets an analysis, and it's either supplied with more revisions and goes back to the House, or it is passed and goes back for final reading. It's a big process to get something passed in Canada. It takes rational people, not emotional, passionate people, not F. Trudeau. This is the kind of stuff that is the part that gets me. What is the basis for you to vilify any politician? Now, granted, Mulroney did have a bag of cash on an A380 Airbus, and that is not just a bad look, that is criminal. However, doesn't mean that he wasn't a nationalist in most of his policies. You have a mixed bag, to use the Mulroney metaphor. And I think that's part of the issue. Life is not always black and white. Sometimes it is. Sometimes you can get clarity by isolating all the variables and finding the one factor. And if the one factor is leadership, I'd say you have no options. In the United States, there is no option. It's Biden or you have no country. In Canada, the choices are similar, perhaps not as dramatic, because, after all, this is Canada, not as dramatic. Ceteris Paribus, not just an introduction, an outro, a song by Wigmore Allen Gibbons. Bye-bye for now.